Please write your doubt, Vishnu. I'll answer it. Just give me 1 more minute. Okay, Palestinians are Islamic and against Israel. Saudi Arabia as an Islamic nation is against Israel. But the US is friend to both Israel and Saudi. See, the thing is, you can hear me? All of you can hear me? Okay. So the question that you have asked, where was your question? See, first thing first, it's not like that Islamic world as you have visualized it here, it's not a monolithic entity. Now, Saudis are die-hard enemies of Iran. The sectarian conflict that happened after the death of Prophet Muhammad in 632 C itself, the Shia-Sunni sectarian conflict. Palestine, see, Palestine was formed at the Palestine was there. Israel was formed at the behest of US itself, right? And ever since it has been there, Saudis have always been an American ally. Okay, Saudis have always been an American ally. In fact, it is said that in Middle East, US had only two favorable countries, Saudi and Israel. That's it. That's American foreign policy. Americans are very pragmatic when it comes to diplomacy and foreign policy. They know what works for them. So Saudis work for them. Americans work for Saudis. Having good relations with Americans work for Saudis as well. Saudi gives so much of resources to the Americans, and till date, Israel and Saudi never had a confrontation. Do you know this? Now no one will have a confrontation with Israel in Middle East. The deal has been done with UAE, with Saudi, and more are Qatar. All these countries have done the deal. So see, Saudi used to see itself as the leader of the Muslim world. Now it no longer holds that position. There is something called Muslim Brotherhood. Heard about it? 10 to 11 Middle Eastern countries that were a part of it. Now they are also having a kind of conflict among themselves. Saudi is bombing Yemen, another Muslim country, for the past 2 years. Do you know this? Hamas belongs to Palestine. Pak used to get support because again, these are very, very long discussions. You want me to continue that? I can very well do that. OIC, there is a history to OIC. Our own Indian President was asked to leave OIC at the behest of Pakistan. Do you know this? Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad was the president of India. India was home to largest number of Muslims way back, the era which I'm talking about. Now it's Indonesia. India is at number 2 in terms of Muslim population. And because Pakistan said that India must leave, else I will leave, OIC had the audacity to ask the Indian president to go from here. ये बेइज्जती हुई थी हमारी वहाँ. Same OIC invited late Sushma Swaraj when she was foreign minister as the chief guest. Pakistan said, I will leave if Sushma Swaraj comes here. OIC said, you can go. It also happened. Pakistan used to get support because Pakistan played religious card very well. Now Saudis have realized that oil is going to finish. Saudis have permitted their women to drive the car. Do you know this? From 7th century to directly 21st century. Prince Salman, whatever he did to Khashoggi is a different matter, but he is a lot moderate and liberal when you compare him with other Saudi monarchs. And now Saudis are losing the grip on Islamic world. The grip is being taken by Caliph Erdogan. I call him Khalifa Erdogan of Turkey. He is now becoming the new Messiah, the new champion of the Muslims. A lot of churning is happening in Middle East actually. Does this answer your question? Can we proceed for today? All of you understood what we were discussing, because this is somewhere related to your optional and general studies both. If it was not, then I would have asked him to send me a message or call me. We can discuss anything that is not related to your exam in hours other than our scheduled time. Any other question? Okay, can I proceed now for today's agenda? We discussed Kautilya and there were few things that remained. I have told you that I'll send you a write-up. I have not finally edited it. That's why I have not sent it today. I was having a busy day today, but then I'll very soon send it to you. Next week, 100% I'll send it. Next thinker, your syllabus says Buddhist traditions. If you see your syllabus, Indian political thought, it starts with Dharmashastra, it progresses to Arthashastra, then it says Buddhist traditions, and then it says Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Aurobindo, M.N. Roy. These are the people that we have to study here. So now let me just give me a moment and I'll just share this slide with you. Your exams are over. Some of you had exams lined up, I'm told. final year students. Can you see the great Buddha? Now, before we discuss Buddhism, I want to tell you few interesting anecdotes regarding Buddhism. I wonder if we have discussed Buddha anytime. Did we? Did we discuss Buddha anytime during any of our course, any of our discussion? How Siddhartha turned into Buddha? Have we talked about these things? How Siddhartha became Buddha? I have not told you. Are you sure? The 4 Arya Satya. Yeah, the 4 scenes. Yeah. I have told you, dead body, old man, a smiling monk, and an ill person, right? So that's how Siddhartha became Buddha. Okay. Now, apart from that, there are various concepts in Buddhism that we have to see here. Like there is no such political thought of Buddhism. For political thought, Arthashastra and Dharma Shastra would say, see, we are not discussing the Buddhist philosophy here. That's not a part of our syllabus that you have to study in philosophy optional, not in political science optional. There you study about Pratitya Samutpad. There you study about Shunyavad and Shanikvad. Okay, so that is not something that we'll discuss here. So what are the political thoughts? So when you apply the restriction of political thought to Buddhism, it actually shrinks. Okay, it shrinks a lot. There are very few things. Right, Vishnu. This one, yes. So there are am I recording this or not? Are we recording it? Who is the host today? Okay, I'm the host. Yes, it is being recorded. Right. So Buddha would say that we have to discuss the political thoughts of Buddha. So the scope is canvas is very shrinked here. If it were Buddhist philosophy, it would have taken 2 to 3 classes. But political thought, we can even start Sayyid Ahmad Khan today. The scope is really low. The questions that they have asked, same things are being repeated every time in Buddhism for sure. So let us see it. See what Mark W. Muse, the professor of religious studies, says. Read this, please. Buddhist spirituality promotes a form of life that provides an antidote to the stresses of modern living. As a counterpoint to the haste and hurry, the noise and confusion of this world, Buddhism prescribes a life of quietness and tranquility, a life of contemplation and gentle awareness. So all the praise comes from this professor. Now, Buddhism main concern has always been freedom from dukkha. So first thing, the first Arya Satya is that there is dukkha in life. All of us have dukkha in life. Okay, pain, suffering in life. And the path to that ultimate freedom consists in ethical action. You perform your karma, cessation of dukkha would happen. Dukkha nidaya would happen. Dukkha samudaya is going to happen. How? Through meditation and in understanding the nature of reality, that is prajna. So how will you perform your karma? How do you know that your karma is correct? Anything that you do is a karma. So how to ensure that you do good karma? This is what Buddha talks about. That yes, we'll talk about doing good karma and how? By understanding the nature of reality, that is prajna. 3 basics of Buddhism: anik, anat, dukkha. 4 noble truths: dukkha, samudaya, nirodh, and marg. So let us again see these things. Just fit my pen. Just give me 1 minute. Few lines you need to write. I hope all of you have your pen and paper ready with you. If you want to bring it, just take a minute and bring it, please. So here, the Anika would say these are the basics, that nothing is permanent in life. Nothing is permanent at all. Anatta, man lives in self-denial. Man lives in self-denial mode. Because man thinks he longs to belong. He tries to accumulate material possessions. People, all the greed and all everything, that you are in a self-denial. These things will not go with you. Okay, everything. It's not only about your material possessions. It's also the way you think of yourself. Okay, people boasting about 6-pack abs, razor sharp biceps and triceps, fully being aware that one day everything will perish. So it's not like I'm asking you to have a 56-inch stomach instead of a 56-inch chest. But the thing is that whatever material or physical benefits that we make, one day we will depart with all of these things. This is not permanent. This too shall change. So this is the self-denial, and because of anatta, man does not recognize anika. That's why he lives in anatta. He refuses to acknowledge that nothing is permanent. Things would change. If it's something is happening, for something very good is happening around you, that too shall change. If something very bad is happening around with you or with you, that too shall change. Okay, So not to be very carried away. Man lives in self-denial. Anatta is a region of anika, and actually there is dukkha. Life is full of sorrows. These are the basic principles of Buddhism. Okay, these are the basic. And anatta is a result of anika. These three are interrelated because you think you are permanent. Whatever gains you are making are permanent. That is why you live in self-denial, and that is why you develop dukkha. Right? That is why you develop dukkha. These are the basics. Got it? Now, four noble truths, the Arya Satya. Suffering is there. Lot of suffering is there. Okay. Now, there is a reason. A reason for suffering, that is desire. Desire is the reason for suffering. This suffering can be stopped, or desires can be stopped. Desire that ultimately leads to suffering can be stopped. How? This is the solution. Eightfold path. Eightfold path is the solution, or what he calls Ashtangik Marga. You want to note down what is Ashtangik Marga? Okay, quickly write it. Right thinking, right speech, choose your words carefully. That is right speech. Then he says right conduct. Then he says right aspirations. Then he would say right belief. Right efforts, and finally he would say right contemplation. This is the Ashtangik Marga. Yeah, you have what you have said is the original Sanskrit vachans. I've just translated it. All of you can read that. Drishti would be your sight, vichar is your think, vak is your speech, karma is your conduct, ajivika is the aspiration or livelihood, prayas is your effort, and smriti is your memory or contemplation, and dhyan is the belief, the efforts that you are putting. Okay. Anyway, this is very philosophical. So no one is asking you the Ashtangik Marg in political science optional. All of you have noted it. Few lines, just few scribblings here. Should I rub it? Can I move the slide now? One is right to livelihood. One I have not written. Right contemplation. You can write. Vishnu has written Ajivika. That is right to livelihood. Right to livelihood is the eighth one that I have not written here. Thinking, speech, conduct, aspiration, belief, effort, contemplation, and thinking. You think good. Don't think about bad things. Speech, speak good. Conduct should be good. Aspirations, the thing you aspire to become. Okay. Belief, the thing on which you believe. Efforts, the efforts that you are making towards achieving your belief. Contemplation is same as remissions, the memories that you have. So a lot of things happen to all of us, some good, some bad. So Buddha would say contemplate and recall the good things. And then the right livelihood. The means through which you earn your livelihood should be a legitimate. All right. We can move it. Now, what more he says? Agana Sutta of Digha Nikaya has a considerable range of ideas on the origin of state. This is the main theory. I told you, Buddhism is a very vast topic, as deep as Upanishads. Okay. Buddha is also called crypto-Upanishadic. I have told this to you because Buddha is an atheist. Buddha is atheist. Do you know this? Did I tell you who is an atheist in Indian political philosophical systems? Did we talk about this atheist and ascetic systems? Okay, listen carefully. Indian philosophical system can be divided into two categories. One who believe in Vedas. Now, those who believe in Vedas, Vedant would be Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya. Three forms are there: Advaitvad, Vishisht Dvaitvad, okay, Dvaita Dvaivad, qualified monism, non-dualism. Okay, so this is Vedant, one thought. Then you have Mimamsa. Then you have Vaisheshika. Then you have Samkhya. Then you have Patanjali's Yoga. Okay, these are the philosophical system that believe in Vedas. Should I write it? Or how about if I send it in your group? All of you are in that Telegram group. तुम लोग सब Telegram group में हो? Anyone who is not there in that Telegram group? I think all of you are. So that's what I'll do. After this class ends, I'll send it there. So आप अभी नाम छोड़ो. Leave the names for now. Just try to understand that there is one school of thought. All these 5 to 6 thinkers, they are collectively called Shat Darshan. I'll write a paragraph in your group tonight itself. Don't worry. So they believe in Vedas. Vedas are the highest authorities, highest form of truth. Now there are two thinkers, two religions who do not believe in Veda. They reject Veda, Buddhism and Jainism. Okay, Buddhism and Jainism reject Veda. That's why they are called atheist. Atheist does not mean who does not believe in God, who reject Vedas. Because when Buddha and Mahavira came, they both are in 6th century BC. Later Vedic era has already arrived. The Rig Vedic era was over, and severe damage was done to Hinduism. Okay, and dogmas were there, conservatism was lot of that. So people were very kind of, they were looking for solutions. What should we do? So they tried to read Vedas on their own. They could not understand a single word, because Vedas, before Vedas, you need to read Vedang, Kalpa, Alpa, that I all have told you, and they could not understand these things. And the Shramana tradition, actually, the Brahmins of those times, actually, history and political scientists have used this term Brahminical orders. They were exploiting the masses. Okay, so because of this, people were very kind of looking for something. So here comes Buddha, here comes Mahavir Jain, who says that Vedas are false. Listen to what I am saying. Now when we read both of them in retrospect, then we realize that Buddha has said the same thing that is there in Upanishads. 108 Upanishads are commentary on 4 Vedic Samhitas. What is commentary, you understand? Lakshmikant book is a commentary on Indian constitution and polity. You read Lakshmikant to understand Indian constitution, right? Similarly, 108 Upanishads are commentary on 4 Vedic Samhitas. So Buddha is called crypto Upanishadic because Buddha has said the same things are in Upanishads. So he first rejected them, then conveyed the same stuff in his own language to everyone, in a Pali language. See, reality is same. Whether Vedas tell us or Upanishads tell us or Buddha or Mahavira or Jesus Christ or anyone tells us. Reality is same. Truth is same. But he first disenchanted people with the Vedic text because people were banging their heads, what is it? Then he said the same thing in a very user-friendly language, that is Pali, instead of Vedic Sanskrit. Understood all of you why he is called Crypto Upanishadic? Because the content is same. Okay, this one is okay with all of you. This idea is well conveyed to all of you. Now what happens? So Buddha and Mahavira are atheist. They have rejected Vedas. They have not rejected God. Okay. Now comes Charvak. Heard about Charvak? How many of you have heard about Charvak? Only 3 of you. So Charvak, it is said that Guru Brihaspati is the Guru of Devtas. He disguised himself as Charvak and gave this entire line of thought so that the Rakshasas follow this and they are destroyed. Which means anyone who follows Charvak will be destroyed. Okay. So Charvak, first thing he did, every Hindu philosophy believes that anything is composed of Panch Tattva. Kshitijal Pavak Gagan Samira. Earth, water, fire, wind, and Kshitij, that is ether. Ether is a place where supposedly earth and sky meet. Charvak will reject ether. He says, whatever I perceive from my sense organs, that is only true. I cannot perceive ether, so that's not true. So he will go with 4 elements, not the 5th one. Charvak is what is called hedonist. Nastik Shiromani, as it's called. Hedonist, whatever gives pleasure to you is worth doing. Okay. So he doubted, he casted aspersions on all the teachings. Okay. He casted aspersions on all the teachings, and he also ridiculed the Brahmins. He said that if I do Shraddh and it can reach my ancestors, then you sit on a tree, I'll offer you Dakshina here, you can receive it on sitting on the tree itself. But since he raised so many questions, so all the prevailing wisdom of that time, all the prominent thinkers, the Vedic and the mystic scholars answered him, and that actually enriched the Indian philosophy. So it is said that Charvak actually saved Indian philosophical system from turning more dogmatic. He enriched the entire discourse. So Charvak is atheist and heterodox. Reject God, reject Veda. Buddha and Mahavira only reject Veda. Okay. Ram condemns these thought in Ramayana, as in which thought, Radha? By the way, which Ramayana are you quoting from? The Valmiki Ramayana or the Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas or Uttar Ramayana that was found in South India? Okay, then it is correct. Valmiki Ramayana is the authentic one. Okay. So he says what Buddhist theory of state, again coming back after we have learned what Buddha's basic premises are, what his basic judgments are. Now let us see how, of course, Charvak is extremely materialist. So it's not considered a wise thing to follow Charvak. Okay. So Agara Sutta of Digha Nikaya. There are different suttas in Buddhism. Okay. Abhidhamma Pataka, Vinaya Pitaka, all these are the main text. it has a considerable range of ideas on the origin of state. And Buddha blames materialism. Let us see how. In the original state of nature, human beings lived in God-like perfection. Everyone was having everything. Remember the primitive communism of Karl Marx? Everyone had access to everything. But as they succumbed to greed and passion, they gradually lost their superior moral and physical attributes and were transformed into ordinary human beings. So in Satya Yuga, man could fly, could talk to animals, to trees and plants and birds, right? In Kali Yuga, man does not understand what the fellow human says, right? Why? Because greed and passion has overtaken us. And the more privileged, the superior moral and physical attributes have been lost. They are into what is called susupta avastha. They are hibernating, and man has turned into a mortal human being. Okay, so he believes that from that time to the current times, there has been a lot of degradation. Now, Buddha was not saying 2020, he is talking about 6th century BC. Since the time man came on earth, till 6th century BC, he is saying that people used to live. Now, it was an era when 16 Mahajanpadas emerged in entire Akhand Bharat, right? From Herat, Balochistan to the Kamakhya in Assam to down south in Kaling, entire northwest was occupied by. I've told this to you, 16 Mahajanpad. Magad emerged as the strongest. Buddha was in Magad, right? Bimbisara and Ajatashatru, the founder of Haryanka dynasty, the founder of Magad empire, were contemporaries of Buddha, right? So Buddha was seeing all this, and Magad and the next one, powerful one, was Avanti. Magad and Avanti fought for almost 100 years and Magad emerged the winner. So Magad was the strongest of all the Mahajanpads. Now after Haryanka dynasty, there will be this guy, what was his name? Mauryas are the fourth dynasty. Haryanka, I'm forgetting the name of second. Third one is of course Nanda, and fourth one are the Mauryas, where the Chandragupta and Ashoka will come. Shunga is after Maurya, come on. Pushyamitra Shunga killed the last Mauryan king, Brihadrat. Shunga was like staunch Brahmin. He was fed up of all the Buddhists. And he even said, someone who is not sporting a tilak, behead him. That was Pushyamitra Shunga. Agnimitra, famous play written by Kalidas, his love story actually. Okay. And Vasumitra was his grandson who defeated the Greeks also. Who was the second one? Shishunag. No. Okay, I'll someday tell you. I'm unable to recall that. So all these 16 Mahajanpads, they were confronting each other. So Buddha was not happy seeing these things. That's why he said that material attributes, you have become more greedy. And this is where his theory of statehood comes. Now see this. State is linked with materialism. When property grows, conflict increases, so state is needed. Very simple. When early man did not need state, right? Early man did not need state because he was living in the natural world, correct? He was doing everything he wished. He could eat anything he wished, he could sleep anywhere he wanted to, he could live anywhere he wanted to. But as soon as material things started coming into the life of human beings, he started having the concept of property, mine and thine. Conflict increased. So to restore order, to restore proper order, state needed. So state is a outcome of greed of man. Unlike Hinduism, where king is God, the divine right theory. Remember Manusmriti, which we talked about in Dhanu Shastra? What Manusmriti said? Manu is the Manas put of none other than Brahmaji, the first legislator. Something similar Chanakya would say in Arthashastra, that there was Matsya Nyaya. So people went to Brahma, then came Manu. Manu talks about certain things. Chanakya modifies it in his Arthashastra by giving the concept as ideal king, Chakravartin Samrat, right? So here, in Hinduism, what is believed? That king is sent by God. But Buddhism believes that people select their king. How do they do that? People select noblest of all as king, as he is Mahasammat. Mahasammat means mutually agreed by all. Everyone agrees that he should be the king. That's why they have selected the most noble guy as the king, and he has been selected by universal unanimity. That is why he is Mahasammat. Did you understand this slide or not? Please let me know. Did you all understand this slide, or there are questions here? We'll come to it. How is the king? It's a republic actually. This slide is all right. We'll see that later. No other questions here? Anyone else? Okay. Buddhism favors a compassionate monarch, not a Chakravarti Samrat, which a Manu or a Chanakya would say. He should conquer by love, not by force. This was the reason Pushyamitra Shunga killed the last Mauryan king Brihadrat, because he was following the same thing, which and because of this pacifist policy, Magad was prone to intrusion from Indo-Greeks. Okay, they have and that was making Sunga very angry. So he should not be a Chakravarti Samrat. He should conquer by what is called force. Buddha talks about Dhamma Ghosha, not a Bhedi Ghosha. Ashok would follow that. He would reject Bhedi Ghosha, that is winning by force, to Dhamma Ghosha, winning by heart, through Dharma. King should be modest, noble, selfless, liberal. Okay, this is how Buddha's king would be. Modest, noble, selfless, and liberal. He should respect public opinion and promote religious tolerance. So he must abide by what the public believes, and he should promote, like if you are a Buddhist, all right. If you're a Jain, all right. If you're a practicing Hindu, then also it's all right. He should make the people live in harmony with each other. He shouldn't show cruelty towards animal. And if he does not do that, then even his subjects will not do that. He should build public utilities and send envoys as messengers of peace and harmony. Public utility are the inns. Inns, you understand? In Hindi, we call it sarai. Rest house, hotels. Okay, every few kosas, kosa is actually a unit of distance, few kilometers you can say, he should make restrooms for travelers, merchants, everyone to people who are going on pilgrimage, they should rest there. And he should set peace invoice, like Ashok sent his daughter and son to Sri Lanka. You know this Sangamitra, his daughter, she went to Sri Lanka. Who was his son name? Kunal. Kunal he also went to Sri Lanka. So they were carrying messages of Buddhism. To spread that message, he should send the invoice. Buddhism promotes dialogue and deliberations. Actually, Buddhism promotes deliberative democracy. When we will study democracy, it is given in our paper A, syllabus mein hai aapke. So there are various forms of democracy, not the direct and indirect one. There is something called deliberative democracy, and there are other forms that we shall see. So he promotes kind of deliberative democracy, where on your behalf someone else will do this job. A complete decentralization, not a strong Patliputra sitting as a capital of Magad managing entire Aryavrata. No, that's not Buddha's idea. He wants small autonomous units. Okay, something which Gandhi also favored, that there should be self-reliant grams, villages in India. So it promotes egalitarianism and criticizes caste system. Egalitarianism is equality. Buddha is very critical of caste. In fact, one of the reasons people turned towards Buddhism was because they were not happy with the Varna system in Hinduism. Okay. So most of the so-called Shudras, they adopted Buddhism. So it promotes egalitarianism. Any point here which you need any explanation on? Anything? Can I move? Okay, first I'll answer Krishna, then Samira. Samira, right? Sam Samira. Because Buddha does not believe in cruelty. So he wants the people to show mercy towards animals also. And how will they show that? When the state will do that, then automatically they will also do that. That's it. No, how do you define popularity? There are Buddhist countries. You may say that it's not very popular in India, the country of its origin. Yes, now you have framed it correctly. See, Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism, and Siddhartha was a born Kshatriya. Mahavir Jain was a born Kshatriya. So both these religions are said that these are the response of Kshatriyas to Brahmins. Okay. And why they came? Because there were many dogmas into Hinduism. Now when Hinduism realized that people are leaving our fold, okay, and they are adopting Buddhism, then they realize it's a time for course correction. It's time to give people what their due is. Correct? And then they very cleverly also declared, now apart from the reasons that Vishnu has mentioned, Hindus declared Buddha as 9th incarnation of Lord Vishnu. If people are leaving us and going to him, let us take him in our fold. Okay. So if Hindus are leaving Hinduism, then let us make Buddha Hindu. So they declared Buddha as the 9th incarnation of Hindu. Yes, Dr. Ambedkar adopted Buddhism. The thing is, see, all the reasons that Vishnu has mentioned are correct. No, do not discuss Ambedkar adopting Buddha in context of state. No, such critical analysis will not be asked in your exam. Why don't you understand? These scopes are not for your optional. Okay, do not do that. इतना critical कभी नहीं पूछेंगे Buddhism के बारे में. Let me assure this to you. And then they took Buddha into their fold. They reformed themselves. And then Buddhism is an extreme pacifist religion. Very, very kind of non-violent. So they could not survive the onslaught. Okay, they could not survive the onslaught of the invaders. So did Jainism, extremely peaceful. So they could not survive the onslaught of invaders. Hinduism somewhere had that inherent. Yes, Tibet, very fine example. Tibet. Okay. So Hinduism, despite all its ills, had that martial feeling in it that no, Lord Krishna also wields his Sudarshan Chakra when needed. So that was the reason, and it proliferated, it got to places, but then Hinduism actually reformed, and then there were same issues Buddhism also suffered from. Like Buddha talks about not giving, offering charity. Chadhava samajhte ho aap? When you go to a temple, you are supposed to offer something. Buddha says, don't do that. People started making offerings to Buddha himself. Buddha says no to idol worship. Buddhists made idol of Buddha and started worshipping him. Buddha was bald, people gave him curly hair. So whatever Buddha criticized, the later Buddhists started doing the same thing. All right, Sri Lanka is a Buddhist state. Where am I saying that there are no Buddhist state? But the question was asked specifically towards India. Why in India, the country of its origin, Buddhism is not flourishing as maybe some other religions? So here are the answers. Here is the answer. Okay, can I proceed now? Now you see here. Buddhism, this is all you need to know about Buddhism. Political thoughts, nothing more is needed. They can at best ask you how Buddha differs from Dharma Shastra or from Artha Shastra. That's it. So it will boil down to his theory of state. Okay, it will boil down to his theory of state. Maybe if it's asked for a 250 word for a 20 mark question, then you can start from Anika, Anitta, and Dukha, explaining it in little details, that this is the reason why Buddha says what he says. Okay, we will see all the questions that have been asked in your exam. In fact, I'm taking, whenever I complete a particular topic like WPT, Western Political Thought, Indian Political Thought, we are seeing questions side by side. Let us complete few more topics, then I'll make you see all the questions that have been asked in your exam. How have they compared? Like during Machiavelli, we did not see how Machiavelli and Kautilya are compared, but I made you write that answer when we discussed Chanakya. Okay, so that day will come. We'll do that. Not to worry about that. Your exam is quite far from now, but then, yeah, we have time. We should utilize it. First, let us understand the content. Let us familiarize ourselves with the content. Then you have to revise. Then you have to appear for test. And in this process, all the questions will be covered. Nothing to worry about. Just you keep your revision mode on. That is Buddhism. Now I'll take the next topic. That is Syed Ahmad Khan, the next thinker. Just give me 2 minutes. Can you see Syed Ahmad? Now, before we start, few pointers I would like to tell you about this guy. The earliest proponent of two-nation theory. It is he who for the first time proposed that there should two-nation theory. It goes back to the Mohammedan Anglo University, that is today known as AMU, Aligarh Muslim University, and this man. It was later than people like Aga Khan. Achha, you share your birthday with Syed Ahmad Khan? Okay, so it was people like Aga Khan and Iqbal and Jinnah. They are the branches. Tree was planted by him. Okay, so actually he's not a political thinker. So Syed Ahmad Khan is actually an educationist. He's a reformer of Islam, of course. Not much is contributed by him on political thinking, but then it is there in the syllabus. Yeah, the answer is right, Krishna. The answer is right. But there is other side to him also. That also. Let us study him, then we shall discuss what UPSC wants us to study. Come on, in your syllabus, you have the likes of Karl Marx and M.N. Roy. You have to study about Lenin. You have to study about Hitler. You have to study about Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Qasim, and Aurangzeb. Okay. He's a controversial figure. That is how we can start. He's criticized by Orthodox sections of Muslim. He's also criticized by Hindus as he supported British. More of a reformer than a political thinker. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan founded the Aligarh movement. This movement aimed at spreading modern education and creating political consciousness among the Indian Muslims. The first national awakening among the Muslims found expression through his movement. He established the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, MAO, that is today known as AMU, the Aligarh Muslim University. It's a central university in Aligarh in 1875. Now, why he is doing what he is doing? Again, the answer lies in history. The 1857 revolt, Britishers, a large section of English believed it's a Muslim conspiracy, they would call it. That it is a Muslim conspiracy. Hindus cannot do this, is what they believed. Okay. And they were targeting Muslims. So much so that a person like Ghalib, heard about Chata Ghalib, the famous Shair, he was asked, what is your religion by British? Are you a Muslim? So Muslims were being targeted. And then Sayyid Ahmad Khan wrote a book actually. Let me just tell you the name of his book. His book name is Asbab-e Bagawat-e Hind. Asbab-e Bagawat-e Hind. Causes of Indian Revolution. Asbab-e Bagawat-e Hind. The causes of Indian Revolution. And in this book, he writes that no, don't blame Muslims. It's wrong to say that Muslims did it. He criticized. He has used such words which I cannot tell you towards the revolutionaries. Okay, in his book, in this very book, he is saying that Muslims must not fight the British. Muslims must cooperate with the British because Hindus are sitting in all the good positions. So if English go from India, Hindus will eat you up. So first reform yourself, educate yourself, polish yourself, empower yourself, and then we will think who will rule India. Do not be marginalized. Develop some sense like Hindus are. Okay, so he would criticize the dogmas in Islam also. So because of this stand, many radical Muslims will turn against him. And because he was favoring British, the Hindus will turn against him. Yes, of course, Muslims were there in the revolt, but then Sayyid Ahmad Khan is not saying that. He is quoting selectively. He has to convey a point. Okay, so he will use such examples. Correct? Can we proceed from here? This college developed into Aligarh Muslim University in 1819. The Aligarh movement aimed at spreading Western education among the Muslims without weakening their allegiance to Islam. You remain a Muslim, but please get some modern education. It also aimed at introducing social reforms. Now, political thoughts of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan can be divided into two phases. First phase until 1887. Second is after 1887. It is after 1887 that he became pro-British. First phase, Sayyid Ahmad Khan stood for Hindu-Muslim unity. He even said that Hindus and Muslims are the two eyes of a beautiful bride. In 73, he declared that religion should not be an obstacle for nationalism. See, he advocated separation between religion and political matters. You know, in his college, he prohibited beef so that Hindus do not feel bad about it. In fact, Hindus were outnumbering Muslim students in Aligarh in this Mohammedan Anglo University. So he wanted Muslims to give up eating beef because Hindus feel bad about it. Their religious sentiments are hurt. And he said that we both have same destiny. Why should we fight among ourselves? But this was only till 1887. It is said and it is strongly established that because he wanted to open his college and for that he needed English help. So English thought this is the good time. Let us take him in our side and make him say what he will wanted to say. So he, in order to get undue advantage from British, started praising the British. And that would mean you have to be against the majority because national movement was building up. Congress was already established in 1885 and on. So he was turning against the Congress, that Muslims should not participate in Congress. It's a Hindu Brahmanical stuff, he would say, right? Bengalis and Hindus are ruling it, so let us not go there. You understood what made him say such things? What made him take that U-turn? Now you see, during the second phase, Sayyid Ahmad Khan changed his views from December 1887. Imperialist thought found expression in his writing, and they are based on the emancipatory, democratic, and progressive characterization of the British rule. So he goes on to praise the British. He calls them emancipatory rule. Emancipatory is someone who works against the downtrodden, against the subjugation of poor people. That is emancipatory. British are democratic, he would say. British are progressive, he would write. He would write at length about these things. Democracy believes in the rule of majority, as simple as it is. So in his opinion, such a system would lead to domination of more educated and more numerous Hindus over less educated and less numerous Hindus. Numerically, in India, any given day, Hindus are more than Muslims. It holds true now. It was true during Sayyid Ahmad times. So he would say if democracy is the rule of majority, then Hindus will numerically overpower your political thought. And he opined that Congress' demand for representative form of government would hurt the Muslim most. He said Congress is fighting to get rid of British and establish democracy in India. So who will be at the loss? It is the Muslim who will be at loss. Because in democracy, Hindus are majority, so they will get what they want. This is his side of the argument. This argument was carried forward by the communalists who believed in two-nation theory. According to this theory, Hindus and Muslims were two separate nations. Their interests do not converge but diverge, which had separate economic, political, and social interests and different cultural and historical background, and who cannot form a single nation. Which means the economic, political, and social interest of two religions, Islam and Hinduism, are diverged. They are very different from each other. Sayyid Ahmad Khan was averse to the process of elections. Of course, he would be, because he does not believe in democracy. In 1888, he said that the system of election would put the legislation into the hands of Hindus, a condition of utmost degradation it would be, and the Muslim would become the slaves of Hindus. So see how he is now saying all these things. He published a magazine. This magazine is still being published by Aligarh Muslim University, Tehjeebul Akhlaq, Manners and Behaviors, Good Manners and Good Behaviors it is. So he criticized the orthodox custom in Islam also. All that Parda system and all, he criticized it. He founded the Scientific Society at Ghazipur, UP, and brought a journal titled Indian Institute Gazette for promoting scientific research. He changed his view because of the influence of British officers around him. He required the help of government for the college founded by him. The British officials took advantage of Sayyid Ahmad Khan's desperation. He was very desperate that I want to establish this college. I want to empower Muslims. I want to make them educated. I have to have this college. So Britishers said, okay, here you will be having this college. Now praise us. So they influenced his views to the extent that he became a man of ideas which were totally different from those he had cherished earlier. Someone who used to say that Hindus and Muslims are the two eyes of the same bride. Now he's saying that they are two different religions actually. They cannot come together because their interests are very diverging. Okay, this is Sayyid Ahmad Khan. These are the only political thoughts that you come across him. Averse to democracy, averse to elections, but wants reform for Islam. So he's like the first, the first Muslim thinker who criticizes the social evils of Islam. So that is where one of his legacy is, apart from being the earliest proponent of two-nation theory. Now, have you heard about Iqbal? No, Muhammad Iqbal. Have you heard Sare Jahan Se Acha? Come on, you must have. So it is written by Iqbal. Now, someone who wrote Sare Jahan Se Acha, Hindi hai hum, watan hai Hindustan hamara. Later on wrote Muslim hai hum, watan hai Sara Jahan hamara. Okay, and he's the national poet of Pakistan. He also did the same thing like Sayyid Ahmad. He also became like, we want Pakistan, we cannot live with Hindus in India. So Iqbal also had the same change of heart like Sayyid Ahmad Khan. So these are the two thinkers that we completed today, Buddha and Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Now, if you have any doubts, you can ask regarding things that we have discussed. If not, then I'll tell you something more that is important for the exam. The next thinkers we can see, of course. I'll just discuss it. One more thing. He wrote an article, The Loyal Mohammedans of India, Sayyid Ahmad Khan, where he kind of conveyed that it is the Muslims who will be working with the British in India, and we will be very, very happy to be under your shadow. Okay, the Loyal Mohammedans of India. Any questions regarding Buddhist political thought of this? I think these two are fairly simple. Now the two most simple things of your political thoughts are done. Now Gandhi and who else remains? M.N. Roy, Aurobindo, Ambedkar. Let me just check your syllabus. Just give me a minute. Yes, we are left with Aurobindo, Gandhi, Ambedkar and M.N. Roy. Aurobindo, Gandhi, Ambedkar and M.N. Roy. So Gandhi is very, very important. Gandhi will be very important in your general studies also, in your history papers, in your essay papers, and of course in your optional papers, in your interview as well. I can assure this to you. So we shall discuss Gandhi in the next class. That would be more suitable. I actually want to give you a sketch of his entire character. Okay, and he will be very helpful in your paper for ethics. So I have got it how to do it. First, I think I'll take half an hour to introduce Gandhi to you. Okay, why he is saying all the things that we have heard about him, and then we will discuss his ideas on different topics that we have to study in our syllabus. His views on religion, on state, his Ram Rajya concept, his Gram Swaraj, his Satya, his Ahimsa. Okay, his theory of punishment, his philanthropy, and how he believes that taking such moral high ground is going to help. So in next class we shall do that. Will that be all right? I guess tomorrow I have a class with you, right? Fair enough. We'll do it tomorrow. I'm sending both these. Or if you have question, then please ask any other question that you have. In all the central universities, there is provision of reservation for SC, STs, and OBCs. Not in minority-run institutions like Jamia and AMU. So the Chief Minister of UP asked, why are they denying reservation to the Dalits and the OBCs. Okay, and then the minority status. On what basis you are minority status when you are being funded by the state? Central University, have their respective share of grants coming from the Union Government of India. So this things were a question that when you are being funded by the government, how can you say no to the provisions which everyone abides by? So that tag has been taken away. The minority status has been taken away by AMU for now. People are even talking that even Jamia Hamdard and Jamia Millia Islamia in Delhi, they should also not be a minority institute, and they should implement reservation for ST, ST and OBC like any other government institute does. Okay, actually they have a portrait of Jinnah. In AMU, they have a big portrait of Jinnah. That was questioned that how can you have portrait of Jinnah over here? Okay. So there was a big controversy regarding this. Big heated discussion and debates, and few violent incidents also occurred that remove Jinnah from your portrait. Why do you want Jinnah portrait in AMU? Okay. Okay, then let's meet tomorrow.